All right, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today. We just wanted to start off by talking a little bit about, your journey through STEM. So could you start off by telling us a bit about yourself, specifically within STEM as well?
Yeah, for sure. My name is Anahita. I just finished my third year of biology at the University of British Columbia. I'm hoping to pursue medicine, so I'm mostly involved in that aspect of STEM, being a first responder and stuff like that. But mostly, like I like to dabble in a lot of things, so I try to get involved in all aspects of STEM as possible.
All right, sounds amazing. Have you thought about which specialty in medicine you want to pursue? And if so, why? So kind of what was your inspiration behind that?
Yeah, I want to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, although I will admit that I'm recently having a little bit of doubts, and I'll explain that in just one second. So the reason I wanted to pursue surgery is because as a kid, I actually was not a science kid whatsoever. I didn't like science at all, but I really loved crafts and I loved working with my hands. And, I was like an 8-year-old knitting and sewing and just building dolls out of scratch. And at one point, when I started to actually like science, I realized that I wouldn't be able to pursue it if I'm just to casually talk to patients and write prescriptions, that I actually want to have that hands-on work and that I was good at it. So that's why I want to pursue surgery. I feel like it's essentially art, but on a human body, and I get to do all those nitpicky hands-on things that I love so much. And the reason I'm recently having doubts is because I realized that again, being a person that likes to dabble in a lot of things, would love to get out into the world and actually help people. And I can't really do that if I'm so specialized in one category. So now I'm also recently looking into being a general surgeon. And that way, in any situation, I am actually ready and prepared to help people.
I also just wanted to say, it's really interesting that you brought that up because my mom actually used to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, but she was an
Hey.
architect. Yeah, she was an architect before she went to med school. So I thought it was really cool to hear you talk about how it kind of depends on like hands-on work because that's not really a connection I made before.
Yeah, definitely. That's amazing.
All right, thank you so much. You mentioned that you weren't really interested in STEM and science, especially when you were younger. So do you mind talking a little bit about kind of what sparked that interest for you and made you decide to, pursue your bachelor's degree and beyond in science?
Yeah, I mean, I guess growing up, one of the things that I didn't really like about medicine was that it always reminded me of being sick. And I was such a healthy kid that I was like, ew, I don't want to work in a hospital. And then as I grew up, I got like more hands-on experience in terms of learning about science and specifically the human body. And I really loved learning about all the tiny little things that go on in our body and making sense out of it. And, like I remember I must have been in the seventh grade. I found out I had anemia and I didn't really understand what that meant. So I decided to do a project on anemia and I found out all the different types and all the mechanisms of the red blood cell, and that just kind of like blew my mind. And I always think about how we're so hard on ourselves. We like think, oh my gosh, I have a pimple. What am I going to do? This is horrible. But that single pimple is actually so important in your body and it's helping you so much. And I feel like just learning about the tiny little things in your body that you're doing without even realizing it just makes you appreciate both yourself and life so much more.
Yeah, that sounds incredible. Definitely more well thought out than any kind of oh, what's your passion kind of answer that I would have. So you mentioned again that you go to UBC, and I mean, I myself and a lot of others on the team and a lot of our listeners, they really do want to go to UBC. So could you talk a little bit about like a day in your life at UBC as a student, and kind of like the quirks, the difficulties, the ups and downs of it?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it's hard. That is like the easiest way to go, like I say it, it's really difficult. I find that uh transitioning from high school into UBC was a bit easier just because you feel like everyone's on like an even playing field, and then you come here and it's such a well-known school and there's a massive international population and everyone's got all these diverse experiences and levels of understanding. And now you're competing with people with like a whole variety of skill sets. And it really does take a lot for you to be able to pull yourself up and just, recognize your own worth and stay inspired, especially because, like if you're like me and pursuing medicine, you've probably heard that everyone wants the 90 like straight average kids, but then class averages could be something like 75, and that could really like demolish your confidence essentially. But I think the thing that makes UBC so great, first of all, seagulls and squirrels all over the place, raccoons, the wildlife, I love it. I'm pursuing medicine, but at heart, I'm like, oh, I'm a complete bio kid. I love all the animals. And also the students. I think that's one of the reasons that I actually chose to go to UBC instead of like Toronto and McGill. It's the students are so kind and compassionate. I have never asked a person for help and had the answer no. Everyone is willing to help you. There's a lot of professors that go out of their way just to support you. And I feel like the community that we have here, how everyone cares about the nature and each other's degrees and each other doing well, it makes everything worth it. It makes all the hardship worth it.
All right, thanks for that. In terms of like, getting into university and stuff, if you can recall kind of like your last couple of years of high school, what would you say was the most important part of your high school experience when it came to like transitioning into university? And do you think that focusing on grades or extracurriculars would have either helped you get into university or just helped you transition into university? So where do you kind of find that balance, and like kind of what lessons have you taken from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm sort of like, I'm found myself in like a repeat kind of situation, being almost at the end of my bachelor's degree and wanting to, pursue higher education. I find that, yes, obviously good grades do matter, and, extracurriculars do matter as well. But I think the most important factor is honesty. And what I mean by that is I've had, when I was writing applications for scholarships and stuff, and the way that I had learned about writing scholarships and stuff was to basically make yourself seem perfect. And I kind of realized that they have so many applicants that sound perfect that it almost kind of gets boring when you're like the 100th person applying. And I remember feeling very disappointed because there was a whole bunch of things that I couldn't get, like awards and stuff. And then it took me 2 minutes to just kind of explain my life story and like my background to this guy from like an extracurricular group who was like ahead of something important. And he was like, I think you're very cool. I think you've got a lot of things to offer the world. And I want, if you're interested, there's like schools in the US that we can like get you in touch with that would be interested in giving you scholarships and stuff like that. And to me, that was the minute I realized I should have just been honest about who I am, my passions, and the reason that I'm actually pursuing this field, instead of trying to be like, oh yeah, I'm just like involved in so many things and have amazing grades. Um, and I do think it just makes you unique. It's the thing that makes you stand out. And that's the lesson I'm trying to take with myself moving on into med school. The realization that you are who you are, and that is the most special thing about you. No amount of good grades or extracurriculars can make you a better version of you. You already have it all. That stuff's just embellishment or a way to prove who you are.
Wow, thank you. Yeah, but beyond that, we're also wondering, so it seems like you have a lot of insight into kind of like the transition into university and even just being a student in general. So do you think you would have any advice to offer to students in general, or also students especially that are really confused about like what kind of field in STEM they want to get into? They're interested, but they just don't know where they want to go next.
Yeah, I would say just keep an open mind. And I know that sounds very cliche, but I really do mean it. Another thing that I mentioned kind of changed my mind about what I wanted to do, especially with regards to surgery, was that I recently ended up going on a research trip to Costa Rica, and I was investigating sea turtle conservation. And see, that has nothing to do with medicine, but I was like, I get credits for it. Why not? Let me try it out. And it has completely changed my life. Just the hands-on experience working with an amazing team and the turtles, being in a new culture. And that's kind of when I realized that like in that experience, I would love to pursue like medicine in rural communities and actually live amongst the people, maybe by day saving the humans, by night saving the turtles. Like you never know. Little things like that, I would not be able to pursue, and I would not be able to have that experience if I was so zoned in on I want to do medicine. It having that, I guess, like not knowing what you want to do and just dabbling in a little bit of everything is actually a strength when you think about it. Because, so many people focus on one thing and that's all they're good at, and you have the opportunity to expand and pursue all different kinds of fields. And I mean, you mentioned your mom pursued architecture at first and then got into medicine. Like, you just kind of got to realize how interconnected every field of STEM is. And no matter where you start, you could end up somewhere completely different. And that just means you now have two skills.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we're also wondering if you kind of have any advice for students trying to like get into the different opportunities in STEM outside of just school. So for example, are there any opportunities that you took advantage of when you were like around our age, or are there any things that you know of? Like, how would you kind of, if you were in our shoes now, how would you try to get involved in STEM outside of just schooling?
Yeah, I think that's actually a very good point, because when I was in high school, like I wasn't really allowed to do a whole lot of things. My mom was like, "You're too young, stay in the community." But then I tried to like use school as my in to do other things. So my high school, Heritage Woods, had a really amazing program called Science Co-op 11 that I was a part of. And you basically get a month to do a co-op job. And for me, I decided that I want to get my standard first aid and first responder certificate. And that is something I've carried with me all the way into university. I'm still a first responder. I'm employed as a first responder, and I also I volunteer, and I'm hoping to maybe instruct courses soon. And little things like that can start from school, and it'll lead you elsewhere. And it will stay with you for years. That's point one. And point two is you don't exactly have to be like, I guess, stuck in STEM. I'm actually like a filmmaker and like a women's rights activist. And so the ways that I've actually tried to incorporate that into STEM is, for example, volunteering with Access BC, which is an initiative to provide access to free contraception in BC. And even with that, like, I get to learn about the science behind, the like reproductive rights and like reproductive system. That's an aspect of STEM through something completely unrelated. Or I'm a video content creator and a social media content creator for Gearing Up, which is an engineering outreach at UBC. And I'm just taking photos and like videos, but I get to learn about like quantum physics, things that I would have never thought of. So take one passion and just like pull on it, and you could expand on it, and it could lead you to a lot of initiatives that you never thought you would be involved in.
You briefly mentioned just in your last answer, like being an activist and a women's rights activist. I think that's really fascinating and interesting. Do you think you could talk about a little bit about your experience as a woman in this field, given that, there's a general stereotype that it's a very male dominated field. So how do you think that's affected you, and how do you think you've kind of overcome any challenges that you face as a woman?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I do have a little bit better just because I'm specifically in biology, and I know like fields like engineering is definitely, women in engineering have it a lot worse, just being, it is a really male dominated field, and women are kind of overlooked and their needs are also overlooked. I feel like from my experience in biology, I haven't had too much of a problem, especially not at UBC, although I would say that there have been instances where I feel like maybe my contribution is undermined, like in group projects where I'm trying to make a point, or I know I have the skill to be able to do something in the group, and my male counterparts are like, no, 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 let me handle this. And in that situation, it is a bit off-putting, and I do have to kind of like assert myself and say, no, like, this is my portion, I can handle this, let me take over, you stick to your thing. But there's always the issue, and I don't think it's just STEM, in any field for any woman, where the minute you kind of step up and try to demonstrate your worth and your knowledge, that people think you're bossy, or that you're just being annoying, they don't like you. And I do think it just has to do with being confident in who you are. I don't think you should have to undermine your intelligence or your abilities to make anyone else comfortable. And at the end of the day, we're all a team here. That's kind of the thing that I loved about UBC. Um, if you're more talented in a certain aspect, shout it as loud as you can. Tell everyone, because that is going to help the whole group. That's going to help everyone, and you should be proud of it. That's all I could really say. But yeah, the reality is there. It's never going to get easier. Not yet. Not yet.
Yeah, so speaking of challenges, outside of just, challenges around gender, what would you say is one of the biggest challenges you faced kind of just entering STEM or being in STEM, just anything around like your daily life as a student?
Yeah, I think it's just I don't really know. I suppose it's just the way that like a lot of information is given to us, like the whole system. I don't want to say education system, but yes, that's kind of what I mean. For example, math courses, I feel like especially if you're a BC resident, we don't have to learn calculus in high school. But then, again, with such an international population and so many other kids coming from other like places in Canada or having schools that offered calculus, just as like a regular thing kids should learn, you're kind of at a disadvantage. And from my experience, unfortunately, post-secondaries don't really account for that disadvantage. They kind of have like a threshold of where you should be at. And if your high school didn't meet that standard, then it must really suck for you because you're going to be struggling now. So I guess that's one of the biggest things. And it's not just in math, although that tends to be the one I hear about most. Especially in first year, it's very discouraging. There's sort of like a standard that you're at, and this idea that being in STEM is so glorified, you must be so smart and you're going to have such a bright future, but we don't actually talk about how difficult it is, especially coming from diverse backgrounds, backgrounds that didn't have access to like constant tutoring or like some really fancy private school. And these are the differences that are not really accounted for, I think, in education institutes as like in general, but it definitely shows itself in STEM.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about like, oh, the dreaded first year science at UBC. Heard a lot about it. So speaking of that, how do you think you kind of got through that first year? And I've heard it's a really big shift for a lot of people. So kind of like, what tools or resources, or even just like what kind of coping strategies did you use to help you, push through that first year and into the second?
Yeah, I mean, the best way to just say it is just like holding my breath and just like sprinting through first year as fast as possible. I will be honest, my first year was sort of a wreck. I want to definitely mention that because coming from high school, I was like this perfect student, and then first year happened and I completely crumble, and that's okay. It's normal. It happens to like almost everyone. So don't feel bad about it. It'll get better. That's definitely gonna get better. But I also think in my first year, the thing that really got me through it was trying to be actually engaged with the course material. I remember in term one, I kind of had this idea that everything was going to be so easy. I've already learned this. And then I slowly started to like fall behind. And I also had this expectation that the way that I should study should be the same as in high school. And we're not taught this, and I think we should be. But university level exams and high school level exams are two completely different things. You literally go home and you have 40 pages of reading and 3 assignments due that night, and there's like 5 hours till midnight and you just got out of class. Like, it's insane. So I think for me, just kind of trying to make it a hobby, like going to class and being like, oh, how fascinating, we're looking at beetles. I hate insects, but fascinating, like, love it. And also engaging with people. It's really hard when you're first year and you don't know people, but literally find one person in class, make them your best friend. Now you're going to be pressured to show up to that class every single day because you have a best friend waiting for you. And that alone, for me anyway, was like a drive to get me out of bed and in class. And that way you're not missing stuff. You have a study buddy, you're making friends, having a social life, and studying. It's a good system, I'd say.
More of like a kind of personal question I had, and I think I know a lot of people that are super curious about this, is that it's a whole question of like taking APs or like IB and like using that as like university credits for first year. I'm not sure if you had any experience with that, but if you did or have any thoughts on it, we'd love you to share and like just talk about how you feel about like, trying to take that leap forward in high school and trying to, skip a little bit in university.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, if you did really well in those classes and you're already investing in it, then I'd say go for it. But if you're at the point where you're kind of like questioning, do I take IB or AP? Is it worth it? I would say, you know what, university is going to be hard. That's sooner or later, it will get hard. If you feel like, you know, should I make my high school experience a little harder just so that I get a one up in university? Then I would say it's not necessary. Just enjoy high school, enjoy the last few years of peace in quotation marks that you have, because when you get to university, you're going to be so busy trying to, have those extracurriculars, having, being on top of school and actually being an adult and taking care of yourself that, like you're going to miss those days. So enjoy high school, have a great time, but also I will say that I took a psych AP when I was in high school. I didn't do the course or like the exam to actually get credits for it, but I found that when I transitioned into university and I took courses that were kind of correlated, like university level psychology courses, I was doing really, really well. And it's a known thing that like when you're in psychology, there's departmental averages and most first year students do struggle. But I wouldn't necessarily attribute that to being, having taken AP and just like knowing so many things. I would mostly attribute that to knowing how to take exams. I think that's all that it comes down to. AP doesn't make you any smarter. IB doesn't make you any smarter. It just teaches you how to study and how to take exams. That's all.
Yeah, thank you so much for that insight. So another thing we're really curious about is, with COVID and all, we were wondering how it was like for you, studying online using Zoom and like online resources during university and like what you kind of took from that experience.
Oh man, it was bad. It was so bad for me just because so I live in like a little studio on campus and my bedroom is my classroom, which is my study room and my kitchen and my hangout room. So this tiny little room is my entire life. And at the time, because it was COVID, I was like, oh, I don't really want to go out and get groceries. It's like, scary bacteria, virus stuff. So then I did get my groceries delivered, which meant I wasn't going out at all. And again, with such a, I was living on campus during like when COVID hit and like the summer after, there was not a lot of people here. So it was kind of a lonely period. And I found that it was really difficult for me to actually stay focused when I was in my pajamas and I woke up 10 minutes before eating a bowl of cereal, watching like, I don't know, a lecture on genetics. And it was just like the most complicated thing. And I could not stay focused whatsoever. I tried to go to the library, but again, because it was just like constantly 14 hours a day staring at a computer screen, it was not a really like engaging learning experience. I actually remember by the end of the first COVID term, I had a really irritated eye just because I was taking a computer science course. And so I was coding all day, every day, 14 hours just on my computer. And my eyes turned red. I had to write the final with sunglasses on. It was it was really bad. I couldn't look into direct sunlight or just any light. But I think the one benefit of COVID was, first of all, showing people that you don't need to be in person for everything. Certain tutorials, I feel like, you can have the same outcome if you're just online or something like coding. You don't need to be in a classroom. You're going to be on your computer anyway. And also for professors to realize the importance of recorded lectures. I think one of the reasons I struggled so hard in my first term was, like 8 a.m. classes every day and you're in class all day. You're tired. You're not going to pay attention to every last detail. Having a recording you could go back to, or if you missed a class for whatever reason, that will make a massive difference in your overall like performance in the course. And now, after COVID, I'm after, we're still in it, but we'll say after. I think that was the biggest thing that supported my education, actually having recorded lectures that I could look back to.
All right. Yeah. So next question we're kind of looking at is just a very general, broad question. Like, so what do you think really kind of inspires you and kind of drives your passion for STEM? And what keeps it going even when things get hard?
I think sort of like what I said earlier, having an open mind and just kind of try to dabble in everything. Like I mentioned, I wasn't always like the typical STEM kid, and I feel like while I absolutely love biology and like learning about the human anatomy, I find that it's because I'm in biology, I've learned about like animal biology or like animal anatomy. I've learned about genetics and evolution and ecology. And all these little concepts are actually really interconnected, and you could apply it to things as simple as like your day-to-day life. Like when you're determining what you should prioritize, you could really easily kind of apply like the concept of fitness trade-off, where if you're good at one thing, you're really, really good at it. That means you might not be able to invest in other things, and you might not be as, good at those things. That's a concept I learned in ecology that I like actively apply to my life every day. And I feel like the thing that makes me love STEM so much and just stay passionate is like an eagerness to just learn about fields that I wouldn't necessarily be interested in otherwise. And when I learn about those, trying to hang on to the knowledge that I learned from them and applying it to my day-to-day life, just because I feel like it expands your mindset. It completely transforms the way you're looking at the world. And I find that STEM is that. It's a way of thinking and understanding the world. And, it's so, I guess for me, it's revolutionary. You get to change the whole world. You take this tiny little information about what's natural and you could build on it. You could, be innovative. You could build medicine and structures and technology and just watch the world form into hopefully a better place.
It's really inspiring to hear about, everyone else's like inspirations and STEM and whatnot. One other question we had was, what do you think is the most groundbreaking discovery that you have made, either scientifically or even about yourself through your journey in STEM so far?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I suppose like the most groundbreaking kind of discovery for me, I'm not sure if it would be necessarily STEM related, but I guess you can kind of try and incorporate it there, was in like linked with women's activism and just like my psychology courses. And I basically, one summer day, I was just kind of thinking about the whole debate that was going on social media about not all women and not all men and yes, all women, the debate that was kind of going on while taking like psychology courses on learning, as in like behaviors learning mechanisms and like theories. And I kind of just thought about it and how the not all men side of the debate isn't entirely wrong, but they're missing a point that yes, all women do have to experience certain amount of misogyny and sexism, discrimination, oppression. And I kind of tried to think about why. And so I ended up writing a paper about how it's more like a cognitive thing, that women are being conditioned by our society to fear men, or to basically and actually generalize their fear towards all men. So you might have one negative experience with one man, but you'll learn to generalize it towards all men. So all women tend to have this sense of like guardedness in situations that trigger them. And it's really easy to say not all men are bad, but it's like all women have to have this sort of protectiveness, and they're constantly negotiating their definition of danger just to have an illusion of safety. And that's like some of the things that I read in a few of the articles that I was looking into when I was investigating this. And to me, that's just so like revolutionary, and it really did change my perception, because I feel like the point of my paper was to kind of hear this disconnect between men's perception of women's reality and the reality of women's experiences. And I think that's really important. And like I say, I take everything and I try to apply it to all different types of fields. And, you could start by looking at, being in a constant state of fear, always being stressed out. The second a man just walks behind you, having that, defensiveness, how does this ultimately impact your brain chemistry? How does it impact, your fight or flight response? If you're constantly worried, what does this mean for your overall health? And that opens a whole new doorway to women's health and like research on women in general that I'd be wanting to look into. So I think it's a bit unrelated, but I always find a way to like connect it back to science. And I think that definitely did change my perception of the world and myself and all the interactions that I've been having. And I hope to get the paper published, fingers crossed. And it's like a piece of information that I'd really love to give out to the world.
All right, so talking a little bit more about STEM, what kind of work aside from like or outside of school are you kind of doing in the field, and how do you get into it? How is it? Do you enjoy it? Etc.
Yeah, so earlier I mentioned that I was actually a social media and video content creator with Gearing Up, which is an engineering outreach at UBC. So a lot of the work that they do is they have like summer camps for children, and they teach them like engineering. I've seen 10-year-olds like coding and building robots. It's actually really insane. The whole initiative is amazing. And I'm only a photographer and video content creator, but like I mentioned, sometimes they want me to edit podcasts, so I get to learn a lot about like quantum physics. And there's things that I love it because it makes like STEM and engineering just so much more accessible for children. Like I wouldn't really understand quantum physics, and I still kind of don't, but I recently edited like an audiobook to explain quantum physics for children. And that made me learn about quantum physics. And I think, again, like you don't have to necessarily be a quantum physicist or be in that, even pursuing the degree. You could get into something as easy as photography or video editing, and that will give you that experience. As long as you're kind of in an initiative that cares about STEM, that will give you the experience. I'm also going to be working at the ER in Surrey Memorial and Royal Columbian hospitals as a part of the ATICO study. It's the Active Transport Injury Outcome and Circumstance Study, which is part of my co-op job, and that's going to start in September. So very excited about that. It's mostly research-based work, but I get exposure in the ER, and I'm working with an awesome team, so I'm really looking forward to it. And lastly, I'd say I'm also employed by Odyssey, and they are like basically they provide first aid for like events, whether it's concerts or just working at PNE. So like I said, I've taken that first responders thing and I've applied it, and I'm employed now. I find that I have a few jobs, but it's really nice because they're a bit more self-paced, so I get to choose my own hours, and that way it's a really good balance for me to have those things that I'm involved in, but also still be able to focus on my school and pick my own schedule and, like maybe take less shifts during finals or more when I'm free.
Thank you so much for that. I know it's quite early in kind of your journey throughout STEM, but we were really wondering if you kind of had an idea of what you would want your legacy to be, or what you want to be remembered in when we're talking about like your journey throughout STEM and, kind of your involvement within the field.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. I haven't like thought too much about it, but I guess it's just because I'm first of all trying to kind of just get into the medical field, and then we'll see what happens from then. But ultimately, I think just being honest and open and just always willing to learn about things, never giving up, that kind of stuff. There's several aspects of my work that I would love to actually stay with people, like especially about women's rights activism. And like I feel like while I do want to pursue medicine, I'm not the type of person that could really just sit still and let the system be the way that it is. I'm more also involved in like policy making and making a difference. For example, we've seen the way that COVID has impacted the healthcare system. And I feel like there's a saying I always say that doctors and healthcare practitioners are not saving lives, they're actually donating from their own lives. And that came from my realization that, we're not treating our healthcare practitioners the way that we should be. There is not enough of them. We need more people in healthcare, and we can have more people in healthcare. But students are not supported to join healthcare. Med schools are so competitive that, it's discouraging students from wanting to get involved when the ultimate goal should be, how can we get people involved? And I find that there's this overall representation, we glorify medicine and all these amazing STEM fields, but at the end of the day, we're not really making it easier or more accessible for people. And I hope that if I do get into medicine and if I actually succeed, that, I have the opportunity to look back and say, we should be supporting our students more. We need to make education more accessible to them. We need to make it easier for them. They should not have to feel like they're sacrificing their health to be able to pursue a career. And I also feel like it's really important because we hear a lot about how, doctors and healthcare practitioners are not providing adequate care. And that is creating this big mistrust between healthcare practitioners and patients. And I hope to combat that by ensuring that, the healthcare practitioners are not being hypocrites. They're actually taking care of their own health and being a role model for their patients. And that can, help build trust. And, I think it would help a lot in terms of both having people in healthcare and combating burnout. If I can make some sort of difference, then I want to. Got a lot of ideas, but gotta see how far I get.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that honestly is really inspiring. At this point, we don't really have any questions left for you, but we wanted to thank you very, very much for participating in this kind of interview process. And again, once more, thank you for joining us for Unlocking STEM. If there's any last comments you'd like to make, we're free to hearing them, but otherwise, I think we can wrap this up.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful engaging with both of you. I really appreciate the offer to have me here today.
All right, thank you so much, Anahita.